Our next speaker is Rabbi Dr. Michael Rosensweig. He is an Nathan and Harold Schupp Chair in Talmud at REITs. He is Rosh Yeshivah, Yeshiva University, and Rosh Kollel, the Vernon Elio. He holds a master's and a PhD from Yeshiva University. Please join me in welcoming Michael Rosensweig.
Thank you very much. It's really a very special privilege to be here this afternoon to participate in this installation. Yosef Cohen, really a very special young man, a very special Talmud, somebody whose qualities of personality really are very sterling, and it's really very special for me as someone who knows him for quite a few years, as a Rebbe, someone who's been in constant contact with him, to have witnessed his trajectory and this shidduch between the shul and him. Look forward to many years of his leadership in this shul and beyond. The parshas that we've been reading in Bereshis the last number of weeks focus on the personality of Avraham Avinu. And on the surface, Avraham Avinu's height, his reaches, his elevated stature, in the 10th of the Nisyonos that Chazal say he underwent. Mishnah in Masechet Avos speaks about 10 exceptional tests, very rigorous conditions in which Avraham Avinu established his special stature so that he qualified as the Av Hamon Goyim, as the father of the Jewish nation and other nations, etc. In the conventional wisdom, the view of almost the consensus of the Mefarshim is that these 10 nisyonos, these 10 tests, which established his method, his credentials, that established him to serve in the kind of position that he does, the Dori Doros, in the history of the Jewish people, but the culmination, the climax of all of that, the 10th of the Nisyonos, was of course Akedas Yitzchak, that we read about not in the parsha that we just read yesterday, but the week before, in Parshas Vayera. After all, none of us can imagine a more difficult condition, circumstance, which the Rebbeinu Shalom demanded loyalty, fidelity, that he implemented Tzivui Hashem, to give up his Binchas, Yechidcha, Sharahavta, as Yitzchak. He waited almost his whole life, had been promised that he would have a certain kind of destiny, legacy, that would be Kibi Yitzchak Yikare L'Chazara, that was to be implemented through his son Yitzchak. And after all those years to be told, Haleu La'olah, sacrifice Yitzchak, none of us can even grasp the full implications of it. And of course, the response of Avraham Avinu, Vayashkem Avraham Baboker, Ahava B'Kalkelas Ashura. Avraham Avinu responded not by arguing, certainly, not even by delaying or hesitating. There was no reluctance, there was no ambivalence. He got up early in the morning. Chazal say he was enthusiastic to implement God's will. And according to some views of Chazal, even disappointed when he was stopped at the last minute and informed that actually Yosef was not to be self-sacrificed. None of us can imagine the level of Yerushalayim, of Avos Hashem, that all of that required. And certainly, there doesn't seem to be room for anything after the Akedah to establish Avraham Avinu's credentials on even a higher level. However, in the Mishnah in Masechet Avos that lists, that establishes that there are 10 nisyonos that Avraham Avinu underwent, Rabbi Yonah, one of the preeminent commentaries, one of the preeminent Rishonim, and whose commentary on Avos is considered to be a classic, makes the suggestion that actually the 10th Nisayon, the 10th test, of Avraham Avinu was not a Kenes Yitzchak. It was not the impossible task to sacrifice his son. That was actually only the 9th. The 10th, the climax, the culmination, that which kind of was the icing on the cake, if you will, of Avraham Avinu's established commitment and loyalty to the Ribbono Shel Olam was actually the parsha that we read yesterday. The difficulties that he underwent in trying to bury Sarah Ishto, Sarah his wife. Rabbi Yonah explains that it was Kevuras, see if I can get it here, Hasiri Kevuras Sarah. The 10th of the Nisyonos was the burying of Sarah. Shenemar, because he had been told, Kum hitalech ba'aretz l'arka u'l'rachba, he was told, all of Eretz Yisrael will be yours, ki l'cha et nena, this is the legacy land for you. Ukishamesa ishta l'matza makom l'kabra, and then his wife dies, and he has nowhere to bury her, ad shekana'o, until he buys and acquires the land from Ephron. And yet, below your hair, he didn't question the Ribbono Shel Olam's judgment or mercy. Lahodia, to teach us, Kama chibaso shel Avraham Avinu haya, v'yemenaseu legalos lebrios ki yari Elokim b'shalem b'chol hamidos. The fact that Avraham Avinu didn't question, that he didn't complain, obviously the subtext is he had just underwent the Akedah. The Ribbono Shel Olam had already proclaimed, Ata Yadati Ki Yirei Elokim Ata. Now everybody knows, certainly I know, that you are the ultimate Yorei Elokim, you embody the fear of God. And yet, in the immediate aftermath of all of this, possibly even a causal connection between Akedah Yitzchak and the Misa of Sarah, according to Chazal, and he has to handle, he has to negotiate with the Bnei Ches and Ephron just to get a burial plot for his wife. This, says Rabbi Yonah, this constitutes the ultimate test of Avraham. And it's difficult to understand, as much as we can certainly appreciate that Avraham Avinu must have been perplexed, and he must have undergone some tribulation at the moment when he lost the person closest to him. It's still difficult to understand Rabbi Yonah's position. After all, what is more important than Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem? Torah itself says that Avraham Avinu established that credential. The Mefarshim suggest that it was not only the height of fear of God, but of love of God. The Rambam and Moreh Nevuchim, and Radak, and Rabbeinu Bachya, all of them suggest that even though in other cultures the love of God, the fear of God don't necessarily go together, Avraham Avinu achieved the greatest heights in each of these, and it all integrated, it all came together, converged in the Akedah. How is it possible that the trial of burying Sarah is something that is perceived to be an even greater difficulty, something that adds greater luster even to Avraham Avinu's reputation in this respect? And I think that the answer lies in analyzing the phenomena of the two events that take place in Parshas Chayei. The first one, of course, is what we've been discussing, the negotiation, the arrangements to bury Sarah, his beloved wife. And what's fascinating, if you look at this parsha, is the transition that takes place very subtly. In the beginning, Avraham Avinu, Vayakom Avram el pnei Meso, Vayidaber el pnei Ches leimor, he speaks to the community. Ger v'toshav anochi imachem, he speaks very clearly, directly. He says, I've been living in this neighborhood, I've been a good citizen. Tzmuli achuzas kever imachem, the ekra mesim milfanah. And he addresses them directly. His request is simple and straightforward. Vayanu b'nei Ches es Avram leimor lo. When the Bnei Ches respond to Avraham Avinu and they say, Shema'enu Adoni, they speak to him in formal terms. They say, listen to us, my master. Nasi Elokim ata v'sochei. You are a prince of God. You're an ambassador of the Ribbono Shel Olam. You're the Moreh Nevuchim, of this place. B'nivchar kvarenu kvaris metzecha. Take the best, not just any burial place. Ish mimenu es kibro lo yichlem imcha mikvar metzecha. No one will deny you a burial place. And then what precedes is a formal presentation, a formal dialogue between Avraham Avinu on the one hand and Ephron and Bnei Ches on the other. Everybody is bowing and scraping, playing to the gallery. Vayokam Avraham, the second, Vayishtachvu le'am ha'aretz Bnei Ches. I was being literal about the bowing and the scraping. Vayidaber itam le'nor, im yesh esnat shechem l'kvaris mesim l'fanai. Shma'uni upiguli, and so on. I'm not going to read all the psukim. I don't want to take the time. What follows in the dozen or so psukim after this is not a conversation, a direct request and a response, but again, playing to the gallery, Avraham Avinu speaking in the most formal language, the response being also equally formal, everybody bowing and scraping and speaking in third person, etc. And the question is why? What happened to just a simple request? Avraham Avinu was a very straightforward individual. He was very cosmopolitan. He had a way with people. Part of the remarkable thing about Avraham Avinu is that he could relate equally to a range of different people. His role in the battle of the 4 and 5 kings reflects that. He could deal with Lot and Ishmael, even Sodom. Avraham Avinu had a special way of interacting and engaging with people. All of a sudden, why this formality? And the same is true for the second parsha of Avraham Avinu. Avram zakein ba bayamin b'Hashem beirachas Avram b'kol vayomer Avram elavdos kan beso. He turns to his, major domo Eliezer, who's been in charge of everything for him. Hamoshel b'chol hashalo. Obviously, the trusted relationship between Avram and Eliezer has been well documented. According to Chazal, when he went to war, he took only Eliezer with him. The Mesek Beso, Dolo Mashka, Toras, Avraham Avinu. There was nothing Eliezer wouldn't do, and there was no limit to the trust that Avraham Avinu had for Eliezer. And yet, how is Eliezer appointed for this mission to find a son for Yitzchak? Vayomer lavdos kan beso hamoshe b'chol hashalo simna yadcha tachas yarechi, with a formal shvua and commitment. Ashviyacha b'Hashem elokei hashamayim elokei haaretz asher lo tikach isha livni midbos Knani asher anochi yoshev b'kirbo. He speaks to Eliezer and he demands of him commitments that reflect not a relationship between two individuals who trust each other with everything and anything, but the way that a person speaks to a servant, who he entrusts with a formal task, speaks to him in formal language, demands a formal commitment, etc. Why is that insulting, given the past history between Eliezer and Avraham Avinu? Simna yadcha tachas yarechi, shvua, conditions when the shvua will be null and void, etc. I think the answer is as follows. As soon as Avraham Avinu confronted the Bnei Ches and wanted to bury Sarah, and they responded to him, Shma'eni Adoni, Nesi Elokim Ata V'Socheinu. Avraham Avinu realized that really he was a double personality. On the one hand, he was an individual who had very straightforward, trusting relationships. Avraham Avinu was the Amud HaChesed. He represented empathy and kindness. He had an ability to reach people that no one else had. He was the ultimate Makar. The Rambam in Sefer Mitzvos explains that in Tanakh we call Avraham Ohavi, the lover of God, because his enthusiasm spilled over and motivated him to reach out to all individuals. But when they said to him, Nesi Elokim Ata V'Socheinu, Avraham Avinu realized that notwithstanding his personal feelings and his personal empathy, he represented a legacy that was greater than himself. Right? spoke so beautifully just now about the concept of Masorah. The idea that every generation transmits to each, the next successive generation, the responsibility to be a proper, responsible, knowledgeable ambassador of what it has received from before. In other words, every Rav, every Bord Asra, every Manhig, every leader operates on two levels. He operates as an individual with empathy, with kindness, as he engages individuals and their issues. And at the same time, he has to be mindful of the fact that he is the ambassador for Torah for all the generations. He is the person who bears the Masorah and everything that is implied thereof. And therefore, when they said to him, the seal of Kimatav Sochenu, Avraham Avinu switched into a more formal mode. He knew that he wasn't just bearing his wife, Sarah. He was buying or acquiring a legacy for Klal Yisrael, the Ma'ara Samachpela, which would house the remains, would be the place of Kibura for all of the Avos. He understood that everything he did would be scrutinized. He couldn't just leave things to chance. And when it came to finding a shidduch for his son Yitzchak, Ki Yitzchak Yikari L'Chazara, it wasn't just his beloved Yitzchak needed a good wife. What was important was to establish the continuity, the Masorah of the Jewish people going forward. And therefore, as much as he, on an individual personal level, completely trusted Eliezer, it was Simna Yadcha Tachas Yerechi, it was with the Shua, it was with the T'nai Kafel. It had to be a legal agreement, formalized with every clause carefully constructed. Because he wasn't just seeing to personal matters, he was seeing to the destiny of Klal Yisrael. Indeed, for this reason, we can understand the position of Rabbeinu Yonah. The Rambam in Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah, the laws of the principles of the Torah, the Parakeh, discusses the principle of Mesiras Nefesh, of Kiddush Hashem. There are times, tragic times, anomalous times, hopefully, when individuals are asked to give up their lives as a matter of principle, as a matter of loyalty to the Rosh. Kol Beis Yisrael mitzuvin al Kiddush Hashem HaGadol shenemar v'nikdashti b'soch b'nei Yisrael. The principle of Kiddush and Chilul Hashem. And the Rabbi goes on to explain the three cardinal transgressions: Barazara, Gilei Rayos, Shvichus Damim, murder, adultery, idolatry, for which a person has to give up his life. And most of this chapter relates to that issue. And then at the very end of the chapter, the last halacha of Parak Hey, of fifth parak of Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah, the Rambam transitions into a totally different discussion. Yesh dvarim acherim shehein b'chal Chilul Hashem. There are other matters which are characterized by the desecration of God's name. V'hu sheyasa osam adam gadol b'Torah. You have somebody who represents Torah. People look at him, they perceive that he's the ambassador for the Masorah, and he's mefursam b'chasidus. People look at him as a pillar of Jewish law and Jewish life and Jewish morality. Dvarim shabrios miranim akra b'shvila. Alpha b'she'ein averos harizachilas Hashem. To go. Lokach ve'ein nosei d'nei mekach le'alter. V'hu sheyesh lo v'nitzol mokrim tov v'humakifa. Umar b'skot v'bachilo v'shtia etzel ha'aretz v'neim, etc. The Rambam says there's a second kind of Chilul Hashem. That's the way somebody who's perceived as an ambassador for Torah behaves, how he pays his bills, how he speaks to other people, the way that he does acts of kindness. It's fascinating that in Parakeh Halacha Aleph, when the Rambam speaks about the charismatic Mesiras Nefesh Kiddush Hashem, where you give up your life, what could be more dramatic than that? He speaks about Kol Beis Yisrael. He addresses all of Klal Yisrael. In the last halacha, here he speaks about Talmidei Chachamim, Anashim Gedolim, people who represent the Masorah. One would have thought exactly the opposite. Anybody can conduct themselves honorably and represent Torah nobly, pay their bills on time, speak properly, represent the ideals of Torah life in the community. How many people really can muster the courage and the conviction to give up their lives in a tragic moment? But the Rambam's formulation tells us that the opposite is true. Anybody can rise to an occasion, but it requires a true, committed Oved Hashem to actually live all the time without any kind of, break. A consistent, continuously integrated a life of integrity. And that's really what Avram Avinu faced. He had accomplished the Akedah. According to Rabbi Yonah, that was number 9. Not to make light of it. Ati Adati Ki Yirei Elokim Ata. But the idea that he was a Nasi Elokim, and therefore he had to basically recalibrate how he related to people. He had to understand that he was speaking not only for himself and his family and his wife and his children, but for Klal Yisrael, for the past, the present, and the future. That was a terrible Messiah. That was even more difficult, because that required a deeper and continuous, totally consistent posture for Avram Avinu. And therefore, says Rabbi Yonah, at the end of the day, even after the Akedah, there's one more test. How Avram Avinu negotiates being the Nasi Elokim Ata B'Sochenu, being true to his private life and his personality, and at the same time, being true to the Masorah that brings him there, and that he represents and embodies for the rest of the people. And indeed, being a more da'asra of a community requires both of these elements. It requires moments of greatness, moments of testing, but of course, on a daily level, it requires that an individual be consistent, that he act with integrity, that he represent, embody, be a good ambassador for the Masorah, for Torah, for what was, what needs to be, and to guarantee transmission into the future. And therefore, I'm very pleased to be here today. As I say, Rabbi Cohen is somebody who is very special, very unique. To know him almost immediately is to know, that he has a lot of charm, and he has a good sense of humor, that he's just a very empathetic, warm, and good person. You can tell that in a couple of minutes. It takes much longer to really appreciate that he's a man of principle, that his love for learning Torah, for transmitting Torah, his sense of responsibility, and his sense of history, being a chain of the Masorah, is something which he's deeply committed to in the various projects that he, is involved in, and the interface between medicine and halakha, Rabbi, of course, was alluding to before as well. All of that comes from a very deeply rooted place. And therefore, I'm happy to say Mazel Tov to the community for choosing well and for understanding the importance of this combination. Of the 9th and of the 10th Nisayon, of Parakeh Halacha Aleph of Hilchos Yesodei Torah, and then the final halacha as well. Somebody who is principled, able to rise the occasion, and at the same time, the Me'ura Ben Abrios, who has a sense of destiny and a sense of the legacy of Klal Yisrael. Mazel Tov.